Take your filthy boots off my showroom floor. The words sliced through the air as Brandon Morgan shoved Elijah Harris, sending the black farmer stumbling backward into a display case. Model jets worth thousands rattled against glass as onlookers froze. Elijah caught himself calloused hands steadying his body while leaving faint soil marks on the pristine white counter. The pocket watch his grandfather had given him, a timepiece that had survived 3 generations of Harris farmers, swung from his vest pocket, a pendulum marking this moment. Brandon sneered, brushing invisible dirt from his bespoke suit sleeve. The farm equipment auction is across town. This place is for people with real money. Several staff members smirked. A woman in designer clothes clutched her handbag tighter. In the heavy silence that followed, only the soft ticking of Elijah's heirloom watch could be heard. What happens when dignity meets discrimination? When a man judged by his appearance reveals his true worth? Drop your city in the comments if you've ever been underestimated, and watch how one farmer's quiet strength changed an entire industry. Elijah Harris's pickup truck looked wildly out of place between the Bentley and Mercedes in the Skyline Aviation customer lot. Dust from his morning inspection of the new irrigation system still clung to the fenders, telling the story of his day's work before this 3-hour drive to Atlanta. At 52, Elijah moved with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to making the earth yield to his vision. His grandfather had started with 50 acres in 1952, land purchased despite banks that wouldn't lend and neighbors who wouldn't sell to a black farmer. Today, Harris Agricultural Enterprises sprawled across 30,000 acres in 3 states, producing organic crops that commanded premium prices worldwide. You don't look the part, you do the work his father had drilled into him. This philosophy had guided Elijah from Cornell's agricultural science program back to Georgia soil, where he'd transformed a successful family farm into an agricultural powerhouse. The pocket watch ticked against his chest, his grandfather's most prized possession, besides the land itself. Samuel Harris had checked this same watch while waiting for banks to deny him loans, for suppliers to refuse him credit, for buyers to undervalue his crops. Later, he'd checked it while waiting for those same institutions to come begging for his business. Elijah adjusted his simple button-up shirt, a practical garment chosen for a day that had begun at 4:30 a.m. in his fields. He hadn't bothered changing time. Efficiency was the whole point of purchasing a private jet. His expanding operations in South Georgia's Flint River Basin, the South Carolina Lowcountry, and Florida's Central Ridge, plus new European distribution deals, made commercial travel increasingly impractical. The legacy of black farmers in the Southeast hung heavy in Elijah's thoughts. In 1920, there had been nearly 1 million black farm operators in America. Today, fewer than 50,000 remained victims of discriminatory lending practices, land theft, and systemic exclusion. His own success represented both triumph and exception, a reality that fueled his determination to create pathways for others. Last year at Remington Luxury Watches, a security guard had followed him throughout the store. 6 months ago at Ellison Motors, a salesman had directed him to our more budget-friendly models before he'd said a word. Each time Elijah had maintained his dignity. Each time he'd walked away. Today would be different. Today he'd brought Cassandra's contingency plan, protocol, dignity. Elijah glanced at the gleaming Skyline Aviation building, mentally calculating flight times between his operations, if he had his own aircraft. "Time to stop walking away," he murmured, heading toward the entrance. Skyline Aviation's showroom screamed exclusivity from every polished surface. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, refracting off marble floors in dazzling patterns that drew the eye upward to the real star's multi-million-dollar aircraft displayed like sculpture. The Citation, XLS Plus, dominated the center space, its sleek white fuselage gleaming under precision-aimed spotlights that created an almost ethereal glow. This wasn't transportation. This was apotheosis metal and engineering elevated to godhood, with a $12 million price tag as its offering plate. Technical specifications discreetly displayed beside the aircraft detailed its impressive capabilities. Twin Pratt & Whitney PW 545C engines, producing 119 pounds of thrust each, a maximum cruise speed of 441 knots, a 100 nautical mile range that could easily connect Atlanta to anywhere in the continental U.S., Mexico, and parts of Canada and the Caribbean. A 45,000-foot service ceiling that placed it above commercial traffic, and the ability to take off from runways as short as 560 feet, perfect for smaller regional airports near agricultural operations. Hushed conversations floated through air scented with leather and subtle cologne. A barista in crisp uniform prepared espresso in hand-painted cups for waiting customers. Digital screens displayed aircraft specifications with elegant animations, the numbers scrolling past too quickly for casual browsers, but just right for serious buyers with trained eyes. The contrast between this temple of wealth and Elijah's practical appearance couldn't have been starker. His boots left whisper-faint impressions on the floor, each step marking him as an outsider. Yet his eyes moved with practiced assessment over the citation's lines, mentally calculating range, fuel efficiency, and operating costs, seeing the jet not as a status symbol, but as a business tool. A discreet plaque mounted near the entrance listed Skyline Aviation's illustrious clientele: tech billionaires, Fortune 500 executives, professional athletes, and celebrities. Not a single name suggested anyone from agricultural industries, much less a black farmer from rural Georgia. The message was implicit but clear. This space had been designed for a specific type of wealth displayed in specific ways by specific kinds of people. Skyline Aviation was one of several luxury aviation dealers dominating the southeastern market, part of an industry where the average salesperson earned six figures, but typically came from privileged backgrounds with family connections. The diversity statistics for the private aviation sector were abysmal. Less than 3% of licensed pilots were black, and ownership demographics skewed even worse. It wasn't just Skyline. The entire industry operated with unwritten assumptions about who belonged in these spaces. For Skyline Aviation's typical clientele, tech moguls, finance titans, entertainment stars, a private jet represented arrival. For Elijah Harris, it represented departure, a means to move efficiently between the pieces of an empire built from soil and sweat. Brandon Morgan adjusted his Italian silk tie as he spotted Elijah enter. At 38, Brandon had mastered the art of customer triage. Armani suit, immediate attention. Rolex watch, premium coffee offered. Work boots and soil-streaked jeans. Directions to the exit. "Oh joy, another tire kicker," he muttered to Gabriela Rodriguez, his assistant. $10 says he asks for a brochure to show his buddies at the feed store. Last month's sales meeting still stung like an open wound. Regional Director Patricia Lawson's words had sliced through his carefully constructed facade. "Morgan, your numbers are in free fall. One more quarter like this, and you'll be selling used Cessnas in Tulsa." 3 months without a commission had left Brandon drowning in expenses. The country club membership, the Maserati lease, the alimony payments to 2 ex-wives who'd grown tired of his ambition exceeding his ethics. His perfect life was showing cracks, and the pressure turned his usual condescension toxic. "I've got this one," he told Gabriela with a smirk. "Might be fun to see his face when I tell him the price tag." Brandon had clawed his way up from Cincinnati's blue-collar East Side, erasing his accent along with any memory of watching his father count pennies for gas. The son of a factory worker, who'd lost his job to outsourcing Brandon, had internalized the toxic message that worth was measured by wealth and status. His own insecurities had calcified into contempt for anyone who reminded him of his origins. His strategy was simple: target wealthy white clients who matched his mental image of success, steer them to the most expensive models, inflate the price by 5 to 7% above standard, then offer a special discount back to slightly above market rate. They felt they'd won. He pocketed the difference. This approach had made him Skyline's top producer for 8 consecutive quarters. Now that his streak had ended the hunger for a sale, any sale warred with his instinct to dismiss what he saw as an obvious waste of time. "Man probably thinks a citation is something you get for speeding," he joked to a passing colleague, who chuckled appreciatively. The casual cruelty was standard for the showroom culture. Brandon had helped create a culture that validated bias as customer assessment and prejudice as sales efficiency. "Time for a little reality check," Brandon muttered, moving toward Elijah with the practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Gabriela Rodriguez watched Brandon's dismissive reaction with a familiar knot in her stomach. At 27, with an MBA and trilingual fluency, she should have been on the sales floor herself instead of assisting Brandon. But Skyline's unwritten hierarchy kept her bringing coffee and filing paperwork, while less qualified men closed deals. "Should I at least offer him coffee?" she asked, eyeing Elijah with interest rather than judgment. Her parents had worked Florida tomato fields before starting their small trucking company. The dirt under someone's fingernails told her they worked hard, not that they couldn't pay. "Don't waste the good beans," Brandon snorted. "He probably prefers whatever sludge they serve at truck stops down in South Georgia." Gabriela's face remained professionally blank, but her hand slipped to her pocket where her phone was already recording. 3 months of documented incidents had given her enough evidence to risk approaching HR if she could keep her job long enough to use it. Her own background gave her insight Brandon lacked. Growing up in Miami's Little Havana, she'd watched her father struggle to secure financing for his trucking business despite perfect credit, while white acquaintances with shakier finances received loans easily. The pattern was familiar, transcending industries, and decades judgment before evidence, assumption before fact. Across the showroom, Michael Peterson observed the scene from his glass-walled office. The 45-year-old manager had built a career on knowing which problems to solve and which to ignore. Brandon's recent performance issues had landed him squarely in the problems to solve category. Michael's finger hovered over the intercom. Brandon's attitude toward certain customers had generated complaints before, but his sales numbers had made those complaints easy to misfile. Now that those numbers had fallen, the cost-benefit analysis was shifting. The truth, which Michael would never admit aloud, was that he'd tacitly approved of Brandon's customer filtering when it had been profitable. He'd convinced himself it was just business, not prejudice, a rationalization his MBA program had tacitly reinforced through case studies focusing on target demographics rather than equal service. "Let's see how this plays out," he decided, reaching instead for his coffee. At the reception desk, Alicia Dominguez greeted arriving customers with practiced discretion. The 32-year-old receptionist had perfected the art of the welcome assessment, a head-to-toe scan that determined who received immediate attention and who received vague directions to browse freely. Alicia's path to Skyline had been complex. Growing up in a middle-class Hispanic family in Atlanta's suburbs, she'd internalized the subtle message that assimilation meant distancing herself from other minorities. Her role as gatekeeper came with unspoken expectations about maintaining the showroom's exclusive atmosphere, expectations she'd fulfilled, without questioning until recently. Another walk-in, she texted Brandon, adding an eye-roll emoji as Elijah approached her desk. "Welcome to Skyline Aviation," she said, her tone cooling several degrees from her previous greeting to a couple in matching cashmere. "How can I assist you today?" Raymond Turner, a 60-year-old real estate developer finishing his own aircraft purchase, glanced up at the interaction. The slight sharpening of Alicia's tone caught his attention, a familiar note he'd heard directed at him years ago, before success had gilded him with respectability. As one of Atlanta's most successful Black entrepreneurs, Raymond had navigated spaces like this for decades, watching the subtle shifts in treatment as his wealth became evident. The code switching, the calibrated responses, the constant need to establish credentials, all part of the exhausting tax paid by those who didn't fit the expected profile. "Some things never change," he murmured, setting aside his coffee to watch with increasing interest. None of them yet knew about Cassandra Parker, yet the 35-year-old financial advisor who managed Elijah's substantial portfolio. With her Harvard MBA and position managing wealth for several high-net-worth clients, including Elijah Harris, she was already en route responding to a single text message that would set a complex plan in motion. In the far corner, Victor Harrington Skyline's Southeastern Regional VP sat in hushed conversation with a white-haired executive. At 68, Victor represented the old guard of private aviation, a world where cultural fit determined who bought and sold aircraft worth millions. His presence today was no coincidence. Rumors of discrimination complaints had reached corporate headquarters. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Victor harbored private concerns about the industry's exclusionary practices. His own grandson, mixed race and brilliant, had faced similar prejudice in elite spaces. Yet Victor's career had been built on maintaining the status quo, creating a conflict between his personal values and professional role that he'd never fully reconciled. The tension in the showroom was palpable. A convergence of histories, biases, and potential change hanging in the air, like jet fuel waiting for a spark. "I'm interested in viewing your mid-sized business jets," Elijah stated politely to Alicia, "particularly the Citation models." Alicia glanced toward Brandon, who gave a subtle nod, the signal to play along for amusement. She gestured toward Brandon's desk with exaggerated formality. "Mr. Morgan will be happy to assist with our aircraft collection," she announced, her voice carrying across the showroom. "He specializes in our most ambitious clients." Elijah caught the smirks exchanged behind his back, but walked forward with shoulders squared. The pocket watch ticked steadily against his chest, a metronome counting the familiar rhythm of prejudice. Brandon deliberately ignored him for 15 minutes, shuffling papers and making unnecessary phone calls, while Elijah stood patiently. From his position, Elijah observed another salesperson offering coffee and comfortable seating to a white couple who had arrived after him. "So you're interested in our jets?" Brandon finally said, extending a limp handshake. His eyes focused somewhere past Elijah's shoulder. "Perhaps you'd like a brochure to take home and dream a little." His tone dripped with condescension, the verbal equivalent of patting a child on the head. "I need an aircraft for business transportation," Elijah explained calmly. "I have agricultural operations in 3 states and international distribution partners to visit regularly." Brandon's eyebrows rose dramatically. "Agricultural operations? You mean farms?" He emphasized the word like it was quaint slang. "Listen, partner, these aren't crop dusters we're selling here." "I'm aware of that," Elijah replied, his Georgia accent deepening slightly, the only external sign of his awareness of Brandon's mockery. "Our smallest jet starts at $8 million. Brandon pronounced each word slowly, watching for signs of shock or retreat in Elijah's face. "I'd like to see the Citation XLS Plus," Elijah said, unperturbed. Brandon laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "That's a $12 million aircraft. Perhaps we should start with something more attainable, like a bus schedule." The last words were muttered just loud enough to draw snickers from a nearby salesman. Brandon pulled out helicopter rental brochures instead of jet information, slapping them on the counter. "Why waste both our time?" Brandon thought, glancing ostentatiously at his Rolex. "I could be helping real clients. I still want to see the Citation XLS Plus," Elijah insisted, his voice firm but polite. Brandon's professional smile tightened as he realized this time waster wouldn't be easily dismissed. He sighed dramatically and rose from his chair. "Follow me then," he said, walking briskly toward the showroom floor, not bothering to check if Elijah kept pace. Other salespeople watched with amused interest as Brandon led Elijah past the Citation XLS Plus and toward an older, smaller jet tucked in a corner. "This is more along the lines of what you might be looking for," Brandon said, gesturing vaguely at the aircraft, not even the model Elijah had requested. "This isn't the Citation XLS Plus," Elijah observed quietly, his hand touching the pocket watch. Brandon ignored the comment. "Before we go further, Skyline Aviation has a policy." His tone suggested he'd finally found his exit strategy. "We require financial pre-qualification for serious inquiries." He emphasized serious with a slight smirk. "That's reasonable," Elijah nodded. "Our aircraft require a down payment of 20%. Brandon's voice rose slightly. ensuring nearby colleagues could hear. For the citation XLS Plus, you're so interested in that's $2.4 million cash. He pronounced the amount with finality, confident it would end this charade. Elijah reached for his wallet. The motion triggered Brandon's laugh, a sharp bark that cut through the showroom's hushed atmosphere. "Bill, come over here," Brandon called to a colleague. "Our friend thinks he has a citation down payment in his wallet." Several staff members drifted closer, poorly concealing their amusement behind professional masks. Brandon grew bolder with his audience. "Sir, perhaps there's a misunderstanding." He spoke slowly, as if to a child. "These aren't rental rates. This isn't like financing a tractor or pickup truck." The gathered staff chuckled appreciatively as Brandon placed a pre-qualification form on a nearby counter, artificially complex requirements highlighted in yellow. "Fill this out so we have a record of your visit." His tone implied it was merely a formality before escorting Elijah out. Elijah took the form and began writing. Brandon hovered uncomfortably close, peering over his shoulder. "Sir, this is hardly legible," Brandon commented loudly after Elijah wrote his name and address. "Do you need assistance completing this form?" The question hung in the air, laden with assumptions about Elijah's literacy and education. The showroom had grown quiet, the spectacle drawing attention from everyone present. Elijah continued writing methodically, each answer precise and detailed. His exterior remained calm, but internally resolve hardened like steel. He'd experienced discrimination before, but never expected it when prepared to spend millions. Raymond Turner watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort, his own luxury purchases suddenly tasting sour in his memory. Victor Harrington's eyes narrowed from his corner seat, making notes on his tablet. "I need to use your restroom," Elijah stated, his voice level despite the public humiliation he'd just endured. Brandon pointed toward a hallway. "Through there. Try not to track mud on the Italian tile." He chuckled at his own joke while flipping through Elijah's form, expecting to find fabricated information. Raymond Turner, who had been observing the interaction with growing disgust, approached Brandon. "Is that how you typically treat prospective clients?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby staff. "Just managing expectations," Brandon replied smoothly. "Not everyone who walks in here can afford what we sell." And you determined that how exactly Raymond pressed his own custom suit and Patek Philippe watch, marking him as the type Brandon would typically fawn over. "Experience," Brandon said with a tight smile. 15 years in luxury sales develops a certain instinct. "Fascinating," Raymond replied coldly. "I wonder if you had the same instinct about me when I first started buying property 20 years ago. Back when I drove a 10-year-old Chevy and wore off-the-rack suits." Brandon's smile faltered slightly. "Different situation entirely." "Is it?" Raymond challenged. "Or is it just the same prejudice wearing different clothes?" The confrontation drew attention from across the showroom. Before Brandon could respond, a younger salesman approached, grinning. "Hey Brandon, get a load of this," he said, pointing at Elijah's form. "Says here he owns Harris Agricultural Enterprises, with operations in 3 states. Probably means he has a vegetable garden and a couple of chicken coops." The mockery spread like wildfire among the sales staff. One mimicked a farmer's accent, dropping his R's and elongating vowels in a crude caricature of rural Georgia speech. Another pretended to milk a cow. Their behavior grew increasingly bold as they assumed Elijah wouldn't return. 30,000 acres. Brandon read aloud, triggering more laughter. "And get this, international distribution partners. I think he means the farmer's market down the street." Brandon quickly searched Harris Agricultural on his tablet, finding only basic information about a family farm established generations ago. "Just as I thought," he announced smugly. "Small-time operation at best. Nowhere near citation territory." Michael Peterson finally emerged from his office, approaching with a concerned expression. "Everything all right here, Brandon?" he asked, noting the cluster of employees abandoning actual customers to join the mockery. "Just qualifying a prospect," Brandon replied with a smirk. "Or trying to." Michael glanced at the form. Mr. Harris indicated interest in the citation. "Claims to, but I'm redirecting him to something more appropriate for his means." Brandon emphasized the last word with a knowing look. Michael hesitated. corporate caution warring with customer service instincts. In his 20 years at Skyline, he'd witnessed countless redirections of customers who didn't fit the expected profile. He'd rationalized these practices as business efficiency focusing resources on likely buyers. But recent discrimination lawsuits at competitor firms had made him increasingly uneasy. Perhaps we should— "Trust me," Brandon interrupted. 15 years in this business, I can spot a real buyer the second they walk through that door. This guy probably saved his whole life to buy that truck outside. He tossed the form aside dismissively. I've wasted enough time already. When Elijah returned from the restroom, Brandon had prepared a different approach. Leading Elijah to the Citation XLS Plus, he began a deliberately confusing technical presentation. Twin, Pratt and Whitney, PW 545. C engines, providing 119 pounds of thrust per side integrated with the Rockwell Collins ProLine 21 avionics suite, featuring the industry standard FMS 3000 flight management system. Brandon rattled off at machine gun pace, deliberately using jargon he assumed Elijah wouldn't understand. Comprehensive avionics package with standard instrumentation parameters and optional synthetic vision technology. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. What's the specific fuel burn rate at cruising altitude compared to the Citation Sovereign Plus? Brandon hesitated, caught off guard by the knowledgeable question. It's significantly more efficient, of course. By what percentage? Elijah pressed. And at what altitude does it achieve optimal efficiency? That depends on various factors, Brandon hedged, such as— Brandon's forehead beaded with sweat. Weather conditions, passenger load, specific mission profile. Let me be more specific, Elijah said. At 45,000 feet, with 4 passengers and minimal luggage, standard conditions for my operational needs. What's the hourly fuel burn in pounds? Brandon fumbled for words. I'd have to check the exact. It's 100 pounds per hour, with a fuel efficiency of 0.4 nautical miles per pound. Elijah stated calmly. That's about 30% more efficient than the older model Sovereign, which burns approximately 1,500 pounds at similar conditions. The XLS Plus would save me roughly $180,000 annually in fuel costs based on my current flight requirements. Brandon stared at him, momentarily speechless. And the maintenance interval requirements for the engines? Are we looking at 3,000 or 4,000 hours before major overhaul? Brandon fumbled through a vague answer about industry standard protocols, noticeably incorrect to anyone familiar with private aircraft. Elijah noted each inaccuracy without correction, then asked about financing options and warranty details. His questions grew increasingly specific and technical, revealing a depth of aviation knowledge that left Brandon visibly flustered. How does the Garmin G5000 avionics system compare to the ProLine 21 in terms of interface learning curve for pilots transitioning from older systems? Elijah asked. It's certainly more advanced, Brandon stammered. That doesn't answer my question, Elijah stated calmly. The G5000's touchscreen interface requires approximately 15 additional training hours for pilots certified on analog systems, which affects my operational planning. By now, several staff members had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. Gabriella found herself moving closer, tablet in hand, recording the interaction discreetly. Perhaps our technical specialist could better address these specific questions, Brandon suggested, looking around desperately for an escape. You're the sales specialist, Elijah replied. These are basic questions any jet buyer would ask. Raymond Turner had positioned himself within earshot, arms crossed, expression darkening with each exchange. Victor Harrington had abandoned all pretense of his other meeting and was openly watching. Brandon, feeling cornered, reverted to outright hostility. Look, let's stop wasting each other's time, he snapped. The farm equipment auction is across town. This is where people with real money shop. The comment exploded across the showroom like a grenade. Several customers looked up in shock. Gabriella visibly flinched. Michael Peterson froze halfway across the showroom, then changed direction, moving quickly toward the scene. Elijah stood perfectly still, his expression unchanged, except for a slight tightening around his eyes. His hand moved to the pocket watch thumb, rubbing its worn surface, a gesture of self-regulation practiced over decades. "That was completely unprofessional," Raymond Turner stated, stepping forward. "And in my experience, utterly stupid from a business perspective." Brandon turned surprised to find one of his recent customers intervening. "Mr. Turner, I was just being prejudiced," Raymond finished flatly. "I've seen enough." Brandon glanced toward Michael for support, finding none. The showroom had fallen into uncomfortable silence. The boundary between acceptable client assessment and outright discrimination clearly breached. While externally calm, Elijah's mind categorized each incident with the precision that had built his business empire. Asterisk. Direct racial discrimination. 3 instances. Deliberate product misrepresentation. Public humiliation attempts. Explicit prejudicial statements. Witnesses present. Recording likely. The familiar burn of indignation rose in his chest, but Elijah channeled it into focus rather than anger. His father's words echoed in his memory. "They expect anger. Give them dignity instead. It confuses them more than any shouting ever could." Samuel Harris had taught his son this lesson after being denied service at a local bank in 1975. "They have the power until they don't," he'd explained. "Your job is to recognize the exact moment when the power shifts." The lesson had been reinforced throughout Elijah's life. At Cornell, professors had initially assumed he was a diversity admission rather than a merit scholar with perfect SAT scores. In agricultural circles, suppliers routinely directed him to sales representatives rather than account managers until he mentioned his purchasing volume. Each experience had refined his strategic response document. Prepare, wait for the leverage point. Elijah felt the pocket watch's weight against his chest, the same timepiece his grandfather had consulted while waiting in segregated areas, while being quoted higher prices than white farmers, while building a legacy despite a system designed for his failure. His phone vibrated, Cassandra confirming her arrival time. Protocol Dignity was proceeding exactly as planned. Years of similar experiences had taught Elijah to come prepared to anticipate discrimination rather than be surprised by it. He studied Brandon carefully, noting the slight perspiration at his temples, the increasingly defensive posture. The salesman was growing uncomfortable, realizing he might have miscalculated. Good. Discomfort preceded revelation. Several business alerts had appeared on Elijah's phone notifications about a shipment arriving at his Florida facility, confirmation of a meeting with European distributors next week, updates on the new irrigation system installation. All required his attention, but would have to wait. This moment demanded his complete focus. The soil beneath his fingernails, evidence of his morning inspection before this 3-hour drive, contained more honest value than the artificial world Brandon inhabited. His hands bore the marks of his revolutionary drip irrigation system that had reduced water usage by 40% while increasing yield by 22%, an innovation now studied at agricultural programs nationwide. Elijah had built his agricultural empire by recognizing opportunities others missed, by seeing value where others saw only dirt. Each acre added to his operation had been a statement not just of business acumen, but of determination to succeed in spaces where people who looked like him were often unwelcome. Today, that determination would serve a different purpose. "Is there a problem here, Michael?" Peterson had finally reached them. His manager's smile strained as he assessed the situation. "Mr. Morgan seems confused about whether I belong in your showroom," Elijah replied. His Georgia accent, slightly more pronounced, a deliberate choice. "I'm trying to determine if Skyline Aviation wants my business, or if I should visit your competitor across town." The directness of the statement caught Michael off guard. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding," Raymond Turner interrupted. "I witnessed the entire exchange. Your salesman's behavior has been appalling." "And recorded," added Gabriella quietly, holding up her tablet. Several heads turned her way in surprise. Brandon's face flushed crimson. "You've been recording me?" "That's perfectly legal in Georgia. Gabriella finished calmly. Single-party consent state. The power was shifting visibly now, like earth trembling before a landslide. Brandon looked to Michael for support, finding only growing alarm in his manager's expression. "Mr. Harris," Michael began, "I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. Perhaps I should take over." "That won't be necessary," Elijah stated. "Mr. Morgan and I have established a certain understanding. I'd prefer we continue our transaction." The insistence on keeping Brandon involved, rather than accepting a new salesperson, confused everyone, including Brandon himself. It wasn't the expected response to discrimination. "But Sir Michael protested, I want to ensure you receive our best service." "That opportunity passed when I walked through your door," Elijah observed. "Now we proceed with transparency and consequences." Michael Peterson picked up the pre-qualification form. Brandon had discarded, scanning it with growing concern. The listed assets and banking information painted a very different picture than Brandon had suggested. "Mr. Harris," Michael said carefully, "this information seems quite substantial. We'll need to verify it, of course." "Of course," Elijah agreed. "Standard procedure." Brandon made a dismissive noise. "Anyone can write numbers on a form. Is that your professional assessment?" Elijah asked mildly. "That I've fabricated my financial information." The question hung in the air like a trap ready to spring. Brandon, sensing danger, but unable to identify its source, hesitated. "I'm simply saying verification is necessary," he hedged. "Agreed," Elijah nodded. "So verify it." Brandon looked to Michael, who nodded expectantly. "Go ahead, Brandon. Run the standard verification." Reluctantly, Brandon began the process, entering Elijah's information into Skyline's system. The preliminary check would run his details against banking databases for basic confirmation before a more thorough verification. "While we wait," Elijah said, turning fully toward Brandon, "perhaps you could explain exactly what about my appearance led you to believe I couldn't afford your aircraft." The directness of this question created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Several onlookers, including other customers, exchanged glances. "I made certain assumptions based on standard client profiles." Brandon managed corporate speak, failing to mask the obvious. "And what is your standard client profile?" Elijah pressed. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "Our typical clients present themselves in a more professional manner." "Professional," Elijah repeated. "Meaning, well-dressed, obviously successful." Brandon stopped, realizing the hole he was digging. "And by obviously successful, you mean what exactly?" Raymond Turner interjected. "White, in an expensive suit, speaking without a southern accent." Brandon glanced helplessly toward Michael, who offered no escape. The verification terminal chimed, drawing everyone's attention. Brandon's eyes widened as he read the preliminary results. "This can't be right," he muttered, staring at the screen. "What does it say?" Michael asked, moving to look over Brandon's shoulder. "Account verification confirmed," Brandon read mechanically. "Assets substantially exceed qualification threshold." A subtle shift rippled through the showroom. Staff members exchanged glances. Customers whispered. The dynamic had changed completely. Alicia Dominguez watched from the reception desk, her practiced professional mask slipping as she realized she'd been complicit in a serious misjudgment. For years, she'd performed her role as gatekeeper without questioning the criteria she'd been trained to apply. Now, witnessing the consequences of those assumptions, uncomfortable recognition dawned. How many legitimate customers had she redirected or dismissed based on appearance alone? Michael cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris, please accept our apologies for the delay. We'd be happy to show you any aircraft that interests you." "I'm still interested in the Citation XLS Plus," Elijah stated. "And I'm still expecting Mr. Morgan to answer my questions about its specifications correctly this time." Brandon's face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and growing alarm. "Perhaps one of our technical specialists would be better suited." "No," Elijah said firmly. "You began this transaction claiming expertise. I'd like to see that expertise demonstrated." The request wasn't just about aircraft knowledge. It was about forcing Brandon to recognize his incompetence extended beyond his prejudice. The Citation XLS Plus features. Brandon began shakily a range of approximately 100 nautical miles with 4 passengers. "And its fuel burn rate at 45,000 feet?" Elijah asked. Brandon fumbled through specifications, clearly searching for answers he should have known instantly as a senior salesman. His humiliation was now public and professional, extending beyond his discriminatory behavior to his fundamental job competence. "I may need to consult some detailed specifications," he finally admitted. "Please do," Elijah replied. "I'll wait." As Brandon retreated to his desk to search for information, Michael attempted to salvage the situation. "Mr. Harris, while Brandon researches those details, perhaps I could offer you some refreshments. Our client lounge has excellent coffee." "No, thank you," Elijah declined politely. "I need to make a quick call." He stepped away, pocket watch in hand. It's ticking a countdown to the next phase of protocol dignity. In the privacy of Skyline's elegant bathroom, Elijah stood before the mirror. For a brief moment, his composed expression slipped, revealing a flash of hurt in his eyes. He'd built a successful enterprise from nothing, yet still faced judgment based solely on his appearance. The hurt quickly transformed into steely determination. He straightened his shoulders and took out his phone. "Cassandra, it's Elijah. Initiate full protocol dignity. All evidence markers confirmed. Documentation package ready." Cassandra Parker replied, her voice crisp and professional. "Financial verification prepared. Marcus at First National is placing the verification call now. ETA 12 minutes. They've exceeded expectations in terms of discriminatory behavior," Elijah noted. "The salesman physically pushed me and suggested I attend a farm equipment auction instead." "That's assault and explicit discrimination," Cassandra replied, her tone hardening. "I'm adding the legal supplements to the package." "Good. And Cassandra, bring everything. Time to break the cycle." Elijah ended the call and took a deep breath, studying his reflection. The same face that had graduated from Cornell, that had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, that had revolutionized organic farming techniques across the Southeast, yet still wasn't deemed worthy of basic respect until his bank account was verified. "This ends today," he whispered to himself, thumb brushing the worn surface of his grandfather's watch. Meanwhile, at her downtown office, Cassandra Parker gathered the leather portfolio emblazoned with the gold logo of First National Investment Bank. Inside were financial statements, asset verifications, and a complete profile of Harris Agricultural Enterprises that would silence any doubt about Elijah's purchasing power. She added a second folder, this one containing legal documents, statistical analyses of discrimination in luxury sales and precedent cases involving similar incidents. As Elijah's financial advisor for 5 years, she'd helped him build wealth. As a Harvard-trained professional who'd faced similar discrimination herself, she'd helped him prepare for moments exactly like this. Cassandra had personal reasons for her meticulous approach. As a Black woman in financial services, she'd experienced her own version of what Elijah faced. Her Harvard MBA and impeccable credentials hadn't prevented clients from requesting someone more senior code for someone white and male. Her solution had been to build an arsenal of irrefutable evidence that could combat bias with facts. Protocol dignity wasn't just a code phrase. It was a carefully developed response strategy, designed not merely to prove Elijah's financial capability, but to document and address the systemic issues underlying such discrimination. Cassandra sent a text to Marcus Johnson, Senior Vice President at First National, confirming the verification call to Skyline. Then she added another recipient, Victoria Washington, at the National Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, attaching the audio recording Elijah had already forwarded from his phone. This approach was part of a broader strategy she'd developed with several high-net-worth minority clients. The luxury market's discrimination patterns were well documented in financial circles, but rarely addressed systematically. By collecting and analyzing these incidents, Cassandra hoped to eventually force industry-wide reforms through a combination of legal pressure, media exposure, and economic leverage. And back at Skyline, aviation chaos was erupting. Brandon's terminal had chimed again, this time with an urgent message. Incoming verification call from First National Investment Bank, Executive Client Division. Priority level Diamond. Diamond level clients at First National required minimum liquid assets of $25 million. Brandon stared at the notification in disbelief. Simultaneously, Michael Peterson received an alert from Skyline's corporate office. Potential high-value client situation developing at Atlanta showroom. Handle with extreme care. Gabriella, meanwhile, had used Brandon's distraction to access the customer complaint database, revealing a pattern that confirmed her suspicions. 12 previous complaints against Brandon showed almost identical behavior toward minority clients, all marked resolved without action. She forwarded this information to her personal email, then to Cassandra's address from Elijah's contacts. The database revealed more than just Brandon's behavior. It showed a systemic failure of accountability. Notes from Michael Peterson appeared on several complaints, indicating he had been aware of the pattern, but had chosen not to address it. The corporate culture that enabled discrimination wasn't limited to salespeople, it extended to management, and possibly beyond. Victor Harrington, the regional VP who had been observing silently, now approached Michael. "Peterson," he said quietly. "A word." They stepped aside, Victor's expression grave. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like," he demanded. "Sir, we're addressing the situation. This is the third discrimination complaint against this showroom in 6 months." Victor cut him off. "Corporate is already facing a potential class action from the Miami incident. Now I personally witness your top salesman physically push a qualified buyer and make explicitly discriminatory statements." Michael paled. "Mr. Harrington, I wasn't aware of any physical." "I saw it," Victor stated flatly. "So did at least 8 other people in this showroom. And based on the look of things, so did someone's recording device." Victor's concern wasn't purely ethical. The Miami incident he'd mentioned had resulted in a $3.2 million settlement after similar discriminatory practices had been documented at Skyline's Florida showroom. The company had narrowly avoided more severe legal consequences by agreeing to implement reforms that had apparently failed to reach the Atlanta location. As they spoke, Elijah returned from the restroom, his calm demeanor unchanged despite the tension permeating the showroom. Brandon approached with a tablet displaying citation specifications, his previous arrogance replaced by visible anxiety. "Mr. Harris," he began, voice strained, "I've pulled the detailed specifications you requested." "Thank you," Elijah replied. "Now, about those fuel consumption rates at various altitudes." Brandon began reciting information, eyes constantly flicking to his tablet. His delivery was wooden, the performance of someone reading a script they didn't understand. The showroom doors opened, drawing all eyes as Cassandra Parker entered. Her tailored suit and confident stride created an immediate impression of authority. The leather portfolio bearing First National's gold emblem was clearly visible under her arm. What no one expected was the second person who entered behind her. Judge William Harmon, retired from the Federal Consumer Protection Court, now heading the National Commission on Discrimination in Financial Services. Brandon's complexion paled to an unhealthy gray. Michael Peterson's mouth actually dropped open. Victor Harrington straightened, his tie recognition flashing across his face. Cassandra walked directly to Elijah, bypassing the reception desk entirely. "Mr. Harris," she greeted him professionally. "I've brought the documentation you requested, along with Judge Harmon, who happened to be available for consultation." "Thank you, Cassandra," Elijah replied, accepting the portfolio. The whispered conversations around the showroom took on a frantic quality. Customers who had been casually browsing suddenly found urgent reasons to complete their paperwork. Staff members tried to look busy while straining to hear the unfolding drama. "I'm Cassandra Parker, Mr. Harris's financial advisor." She introduced herself to Michael and Victor, deliberately ignoring Brandon. "And this is Judge William Harmon, whose expertise Mr. Harris thought might be valuable today." "Gentlemen," Judge Harmon nodded, his 70 years, carrying the gravitas of someone who had spent decades addressing systemic discrimination. "Fascinating operation you have here." The implication in his tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a customer complaint, it was potentially a legal matter with significant implications. "Judge Harmon, this is an unexpected honor," Victor managed, extending his hand. "I followed your work on equal access to financial services." "Have you?" the judge replied mildly. "Interesting." I've been following some patterns in private aviation sales recently. Remarkable statistical anomalies in customer treatment based on certain visual factors. Brandon looked as though he might faint. Michael Peterson was rapidly calculating the potential fallout. Victor Harrington, recognizing the corporate disaster unfolding, took immediate control. Mr. Harris, Judge Harmon, Miss Parker. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in our executive conference room. I'd prefer to remain here, Elijah stated calmly, where the initial interactions occurred. His insistence on staying in the public showroom made the stakes clear. This wasn't about private resolution. It was about public accountability. As you wish, Victor conceded. Though I assure you, what you experience today does not represent Skyline Aviation's values or policies. Doesn't it? Elijah asked mildly. The evidence suggests otherwise. I believe these financial documents will address any questions about Mr. Harris's qualifications, Cassandra stated, opening the portfolio. The top document, clearly visible to everyone, confirmed liquid assets exceeding $50 million, with a net worth approaching $120 million. Brandon's eyes widened as he scanned figures that dwarfed even his most substantial previous clients. As you can see, Cassandra continued professionally, Mr. Harris is more than qualified to purchase the Citation XLS Plus. In fact, he could purchase your entire inventory if desired. Victor Harrington immediately took charge. Mr. Harris, on behalf of Skyline Aviation, I offer our most sincere apologies. This treatment is completely unacceptable, and I assure you there will be immediate consequences. I'm not interested in apologies, Elijah replied evenly. I'm interested in accountability and change. Absolutely, Victor agreed quickly. We take this extremely seriously. Do you? Judge Harmon interrupted, removing a folder from his briefcase. Because our preliminary analysis suggests a pattern of similar incidents across multiple Skyline locations. He placed a statistical analysis on the counter, showing discrimination complaints at Skyline showrooms nationwide, categorized by customer demographics. The data was damning. Minority customers were 3 times more likely to report negative experiences, 5 times more likely to be quoted inflated prices, and 8 times more likely to be redirected to lower-priced models regardless of financial qualifications. This could be coincidental, of course, the judge added mildly. But in my experience, mathematical patterns rarely lie. Victor's expression hardened as he reviewed the data. The conflict within him was visible. The corporate executive trained to minimize liability, warring with the grandfather who'd seen his own family face similar treatment. I was not aware of this analysis. Few are. Judge Harmon nodded. That's rather the point of our commission's work. Gabriella stepped forward, tablet in hand. I can confirm the pattern exists at this location, she said quietly. I've documented 12 similar incidents involving Mr. Morgan in the past 8 months. All eyes turned to Gabriella in surprise. Miss Rodriguez. Michael began warningly that information is confidential. Actually, Judge Harmon interrupted. Employee reporting of discriminatory practices is protected under federal whistleblower statutes. Miss Rodriguez is exercising her legal right to address potentially unlawful behavior. From her desk, Alicia Dominguez watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Her role in perpetuating the system had become suddenly uncomfortably clear. The realization that she'd been complicit in discrimination, not just today, but for years, triggered a crisis of conscience. With a decisive motion, she reached for her tablet and began typing an email to HR detailing her own observations of systematic bias in customer treatment. The showroom had become unnaturally quiet as the situation escalated from an individual complaint to potential systemic legal issues. Brandon stood frozen, watching his career disintegrate in real time. Raymond Turner, who had been observing from nearby, stepped forward. For the record, he stated clearly, I witnessed everything from the moment Mr. Harris entered. I would be willing to provide sworn testimony about the treatment he received. That won't be necessary yet, Elijah replied, emphasizing yet just enough to make its implication clear. But I appreciate your integrity, Mr. Turner. Victor Harrington, recognizing the severity of the situation, made an executive decision. Brandon, you're suspended effective immediately. Please clear your desk and leave the premises. Brandon's face drained of what little color remained. Mr. Harrington, I can explain. Save it for the disciplinary hearing, Victor cut him off. And pray that Mr. Harris doesn't file formal charges for assault and discrimination. Brandon looked to Michael for support, finding none. His carefully constructed professional identity was crumbling, like a sandcastle at high tide. Mr. Harris, Victor continued, I'd like to personally handle your transaction from this point forward. I assure you that what you experience today does not reflect our corporate values. Actually, Elijah interrupted, it appears to reflect them perfectly. The question is whether those values will change as a result of today. Victor blinked, unused to being challenged so directly. I assure you we are committed to addressing. Commitments mean little without specific actions. Judge Harmon noted decades of experience evident in his tone. In my experience, corporations need both incentive and structure to create meaningful change. Elijah nodded. Which is precisely why I came prepared with both. He opened the second folder Cassandra had provided, revealing a detailed proposal document titled Systemic Resolution Framework. I'm still interested in purchasing an aircraft today. Elijah stated his decision, sending visible relief through the executive's tense postures. But first, there are some conditions we need to discuss. The silence following Elijah's statement stretched like a drawn bowstring. Victor Harrington studied the Systemic Resolution Framework document with growing discomfort, while Michael Peterson visibly calculated potential damage to quarterly numbers versus long-term liability. Brandon Morgan remained frozen in place, career in freefall, unable to process how thoroughly his world had collapsed in less than an hour. Perhaps we should review these conditions in private, Victor suggested, trying to regain control of the situation. I think we're past the point of privacy, Elijah replied, nodding toward the gathered witnesses. Transparency seems appropriate now. Cassandra laid out additional documentation on the counter, statistical analyses, previous complaint records, industry comparisons. The methodical presentation transformed the confrontation from an individual grievance into a systemic indictment. Skyline Aviation's pattern of discriminatory practices isn't unique in luxury sales, she explained professionally, but it is particularly well documented due to your digital record-keeping system. She pulled up a spreadsheet showing customer interaction data from Skyline's own CRM system, revealing stark disparities in treatment based on perceived customer demographics. White customers spent an average of 3.7 minutes waiting for initial contact, while customers of color waited 12.3 minutes, Cassandra noted. White customers were offered refreshments 94% of the time on first visit. Customers of color, 23%. Most tellingly, white customers received accurate pricing information 97% of the time. Customers of color received inflated initial quotes in 72% of documented cases. The analysis wasn't unique to Skyline. Across the luxury aviation industry, similar patterns prevailed. A 2023 industry-wide study had found that minority buyers faced discriminatory treatment in 68% of test scenarios, with price disparities averaging 8% higher than quotes given to white buyers with identical financial profiles. Victor's expression darkened with each statistic. These weren't external allegations, they were patterns extracted from Skyline's own data. How did you access our internal discovery materials? From the Miami lawsuit, Judge Harmon explained calmly. Public record once submitted to the court. The Miami case Victor had mentioned earlier suddenly took on new significance. What had been presented internally as an isolated incident now appeared to be part of a systematic problem, one that corporate leadership had attempted to contain rather than address. Brandon, listening in horror, finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. I treat all qualified buyers the same. The operative word being qualified, Elijah observed. And you determine qualification. How exactly? By appearance, accent, skin color. Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it, recognizing the trap in the question. Raymond Turner, still observing nearby, added fuel to the fire. He quoted me standard rates when I purchased my Gulfstream last month. Based on Ms. Parker's analysis, it seems Mr. Harris was initially quoted approximately 8% above market. Interesting discrepancy. The observation hung in the air, impossible to dismiss as coincidence given the statistical pattern already presented. Victor Harrington made an executive decision. Miss Rodriguez, please escort Mr. Morgan to HR to begin his exit process. Sir Brandon protested. Now Victor stated flatly, before you create additional liability for this company. As Brandon was led away, shoulders slumped in defeat. Michael Peterson attempted damage control. Mr. Harris, I cannot adequately express how seriously we take this situation. I hope we can find a path forward that addresses your concerns while minimizing corporate exposure. Elijah finished. That's precisely what my proposal addresses, provided you're genuinely interested in systemic change rather than cosmetic fixes. Michael glanced at Victor, who nodded gravely. We're listening. Cassandra opened her laptop, displaying a presentation that Judge Harmon navigated with practiced familiarity. Mr. Harris's proposal contains 5 key components, the judge explained. Each addresses a specific aspect of the discriminatory practices identified in our analysis. The presentation outlined requirements for 1. Independent investigation of discrimination patterns across all Skyline locations. 2. Mandatory bias training developed by diversity experts. 3. Restructured commission systems, removing incentives for demographic profiling. 4. Transparent pricing protocols with customer verification. 5. Regular statistical audits with public reporting. These measures aren't punitive, Elijah clarified. They're corrective. The goal isn't to damage Skyline Aviation, but to transform it into an industry leader in equitable sales practices. Victor studied the proposal with growing recognition that this was no ordinary customer complaint. The framework wasn't hastily assembled in anger. It was meticulously developed, legally sound, and potentially transformative. The internal conflict playing across Victor's face reflected his personal struggle. For years, he'd navigated the contradiction between his private concerns about discrimination and his professional role maintaining an exclusive industry culture. His grandson's experiences had brought these contradictions into painful focus, yet institutional momentum had made change seem impossible. Now presented with both evidence and a framework for reform, Victor faced a defining choice between defending the status quo or embracing necessary change. You came prepared for discrimination, he observed quietly. I've had a lifetime of preparation, Elijah replied, his hand touching the pocket watch. The question is whether Skyline is prepared for change. The showroom remained unusually silent, the normal business operations suspended, as staff and customers alike recognized they were witnessing something significant. Not just a conflict resolution, but potentially an industry inflection point. Mr. Harris, Victor said finally, I believe we have the foundation for a productive discussion. Cassandra initiated a presentation on her laptop, connected wirelessly to one of the showroom's display screens, typically used for aircraft specifications. The Skyline logo faded, replaced by aerial imagery of vast agricultural operations stretching to the horizon. While you consider this proposal, she addressed the Skyline executives. Perhaps it would be helpful to understand exactly who Mr. Morgan dismissed today. The display showed a bird's-eye view of immaculate farmland, thousands of acres of orderly crops, modern irrigation systems creating precise patterns across the landscape like abstract art drawn on earth. Harris Agricultural Enterprises encompasses over 30,000 acres across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. Cassandra began her tone clinical rather than boastful. Founded by Elijah's grandfather with just 50 acres in 1952, it has grown to become one of the largest Black-owned agricultural businesses in America. The display shifted to show Harris's proprietary drip irrigation system, a revolutionary design that delivered precisely calibrated amounts of water and nutrients directly to plant roots through underground pipes reducing water usage by 40%, while increasing crop yield by 22%. Computer-controlled sensors monitored soil moisture and nutrient levels in real time, automatically adjusting flow rates to optimize growth conditions while minimizing resource use. Mr. Harris holds 3 patents on sustainable farming technology. Cassandra continued. His water conservation systems have been adopted by agricultural operations in 12 countries and are currently being studied by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization as a potential solution for drought-prone regions. The screens shifted again, showing modern processing facilities where workers in clean uniforms operated sophisticated equipment that sorted packaged and prepared organic produce for distribution. The company employs over 400 people year-round with an additional 250 seasonal workers. Annual revenue exceeded $85 million last year, with projections of $92 million for the current fiscal year. Victor and Michael exchanged glances, the magnitude of their misjudgment becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't a simple farm. It was a sophisticated agricultural empire utilizing cutting-edge technology and innovation. Harris specializes in organic produce with particular emphasis on sustainable farming methods. Cassandra continued. Their proprietary irrigation systems have reduced water usage by 40%, while increasing yield by 22%, attracting attention from agricultural programs at Cornell UC Davis and internationally. The screens shifted to show a sleek corporate headquarters building with the Harris Agricultural Enterprises logo prominently displayed. The company maintains distribution contracts with 15 countries across Europe and Asia, with recent expansion into emerging markets in South America. Mr. Harris personally oversees these relationships, necessitating frequent international travel. Raymond Turner whistled softly. I thought I recognized the name. Harris Organic is in every premium grocery chain in the Southeast. Correct. Cassandra nodded. Our produce supplies 5 major national retailers and 3 European supermarket chains. The presentation shifted to real-world impact, showing Harris's scholarship program for minority students in agricultural sciences, a $5 million annual investment that had already created pathways for over 300 young people from underrepresented communities. Beyond commercial success, Harris Agricultural has become a leader in creating opportunities within an industry that has historically excluded minority participation, Cassandra explained. The decline in black farm ownership from nearly 1 million operations in 1920 to fewer than 50,000 today represents one of the largest transfers of wealth and opportunity in American history. Mr. Harris's work directly addresses this legacy. The display changed again, showing Elijah in professional attire speaking at what appeared to be an industry conference. Mr. Harris serves on the boards of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the American Farmland Trust, and the Agricultural Innovation Foundation. He holds patents on 3 farming technology systems and has been featured in Forbes Business Insider and Agronomic Quarterly as an industry innovator. She clicked to the next slide, showing Elijah shaking hands with several recognizable political figures. He has advised 2 presidential administrations on agricultural policy and sustainability initiatives. His philanthropic foundation has provided over $12 million in scholarships to minority students pursuing agricultural science degrees. The systematic dismantling of Brandon's assumptions was being witnessed by everyone in the showroom. Several staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances, recognizing how easily they had participated in the same prejudice. Mr. Harris's current transportation needs involve regular travel between his 3 main operational hubs in Atlanta, Charleston, and Miami, as well as international meetings with distribution partners. The Citation XLS Plus would reduce his travel time by approximately 60%, representing a significant efficiency gain for his business operations. Cassandra closed the presentation with a final slide. Harris Agricultural Enterprises' current fleet of vehicles, including 2 helicopters and a smaller, older private aircraft. This would be Mr. Harris's 2nd aircraft purchase. His current Beechcraft King Air, purchased 5 years ago, no longer meets his expanding business needs. The revelation that Elijah already owned an aircraft seemed to hit Michael particularly hard. He had assumed a complete novice, yet Elijah had been asking informed technical questions that Brandon had dismissed. Cassandra closed her laptop. "I trust this clarifies any confusion about Mr. Harris's qualifications as a serious buyer." The silence that followed was profound. Every assumption Brandon had made had been systematically and publicly disproven. Elijah had remained silent throughout the presentation, his expression unchanged. Now he spoke quietly. "I don't share this information to impress anyone. I share it to illustrate the cost of prejudice, not to me, but to you. Today, your assumptions nearly cost your company a $12 million sale. But more importantly, they revealed a systemic failure in how you evaluate human beings." His words carried no anger, only a calm assessment that made them all the more powerful. "The fact that I need to prove my worth with revenue figures and acreage before receiving basic professional courtesy is the problem we're addressing today." Victor Harrington nodded slowly, a man recognizing not just a liability issue, but a fundamental ethical failure. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Harris," he acknowledged, surprising everyone with his candor. "And speaking personally, rather than corporately, I'm ashamed of what happened here today." As Gabriella escorted him toward HR, Brandon Morgan's world disintegrated in slow motion. Each revelation about Elijah Harris had struck him like a physical blow, dismantling the foundation of assumptions upon which he'd built his sales approach, his career, and his entire self-image. His mind replayed his own words with excruciating clarity. Asterisk. "The farm equipment auction is across town." Asterisk. "These aren't crop dusters we're selling here." Asterisk. "Perhaps we should start with something more attainable." Each comment delivered with casual dismissiveness now returned as evidence of his catastrophic misjudgment. How could he have been so wrong? More disturbing was the realization that he wouldn't have made those assumptions about a white man in casual clothes. Brandon barely registered the stares of colleagues as he was led through the showroom. The luxury watches, custom suits, and country club memberships that had formed his identity suddenly seemed hollow status symbols he'd used to separate himself from people like Elijah Harris, who had built actual value while Brandon had merely performed success. 15 years of sales success. 8 consecutive quarters. As top performer achievements he'd worn like armor now offered no protection. Worse, the revelation about previous complaints suggested his success had been built on a pattern of discrimination rather than superior skill. He'd cultivated wealthy white clients while dismissing others, never questioning the bias inherent in his approach. "This can't be happening," he muttered as they reached the HR department. "It's been happening for months," Gabriella replied quietly. "To dozens of customers. You just never noticed the consequences until now." Brandon sank into a chair outside the HR director's office, head in his hands. "I wasn't being racist," he insisted, more to himself than to Gabriella. "I was just following the profile of likely buyers." "And how did you determine that profile?" she asked, echoing Elijah's earlier question. The challenge hung in the air between them. Brandon had no answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. After a moment, Gabriella's expression softened slightly. "You know what's ironic? If you'd treated him with basic courtesy, you would have earned a commission that could have saved your career. Now you'll be lucky if you're not named in a lawsuit." She left him there, returning to the showroom, where the real decisions were being made. Brandon sat alone, confronting an uncomfortable truth. His behavior toward Elijah hadn't been an anomaly or a bad day. It had been his standard operating procedure, just applied to someone with the power to challenge it. Deep in his memory, Brandon recalled his father's humiliation at the bank when trying to secure a small business loan after the factory closed, how the loan officer had spoken to him with the same dismissive tone Brandon had just used with Elijah. He'd sworn then that he would never be on the receiving end of such treatment, but in his determination to claim status, he'd become the very thing he'd once despised. The realization brought no clarity, only confusion. For years, he'd justified his approach as business acumen, as customer assessment, as sales efficiency, never acknowledging the prejudice beneath these rationalizations. How many sales had he lost? How many people had he humiliated based on superficial judgments? The financial cost to his employer suddenly seemed secondary to the human cost of his behavior. The HR director emerged from her office, expression grave. "Mr. Morgan, please come in." Inside, she had already pulled up his personnel file and the documentation Gabriella had provided. "This is extensive," she said, gesturing to the evidence of discriminatory patterns. "I can explain," Brandon began. "Can you?" she interrupted. "Because the statistical evidence suggests a pattern so consistent, it's difficult to attribute to anything but deliberate bias." She turned her monitor to show him the analysis side-by-side comparisons of his interactions with different customer demographics, pricing discrepancies, waiting times, technical information provided. The data painted a damning picture. "I didn't realize," he started. "That's the problem, isn't it?" the HR director observed. "You didn't have to realize. The system allowed your behavior to continue unchecked until you targeted someone with the resources to challenge it." Brandon had no response. For the first time in his professional life, his practiced charm and sales techniques offered no escape. "Your employment with Skyline Aviation is terminated effective immediately," she stated, sliding termination paperwork across the desk. "Given the circumstances, you'll be escorted to clear your personal items, then off the premises." "What about my pending commissions?" he asked weakly. "Forfeit, per your employment agreement's ethics clause," she replied. "And I should advise you that any commissions earned through discriminatory pricing may be subject to legal review." The statement sent a chill through Brandon. Not only had he lost his job, but his previous earnings might be questioned as well. As security arrived to escort him, Brandon experienced something entirely new: powerlessness. The same feeling he had casually inflicted on countless customers now engulfed him completely. In the executive conference room, Elijah Harris was negotiating not for special treatment, but for systemic change that would prevent others from experiencing what Brandon had put him through. Meanwhile, Brandon was losing everything because he'd been unable to see beyond appearances, a failure of vision that had finally cost him far more than a commission. The executive conference room at Skyline Aviation had hosted thousands of aircraft purchase negotiations, but never one quite like this. Elijah Harris sat at the head of the table, a position traditionally reserved for the senior company representative, with Cassandra Parker and Judge Harmon flanking him. Opposite sat Victor Harrington, Michael Peterson, and Patricia Lawson, who had arrived halfway through the presentation after an emergency call from corporate headquarters. "To be absolutely clear," Patricia began, her tone carefully measured, "we're discussing both the purchase of a Citation XLS Plus and the implementation of company-wide reforms as part of the same transaction." "That's correct," Elijah confirmed. "I'm still interested in purchasing an aircraft, but only from a company committed to meaningful change." Patricia exchanged glances with Victor before proceeding. "Some of these conditions would require board approval and significant operational changes across all 15 Skyline locations." "I'm aware," Elijah nodded, "which is why the proposal includes reasonable implementation timelines. The independent investigation could begin immediately, while the training programs and system restructuring would be phased in over 6 months. Judge Harmon added, "Similar frameworks have been successfully implemented at other luxury retailers following discrimination settlements. The difference here is that Mr. Harris is offering Skyline the opportunity to adopt these changes voluntarily, rather than under court order." The implication hung in the air. This could be handled cooperatively now or adversarially later. "The public reporting requirement concerns me," Michael interjected. "Publishing audit results could create competitive disadvantages." "Or competitive advantages," Cassandra countered. "Transparency about equitable practices could differentiate Skyline in an industry not known for inclusion." "This isn't just a moral issue," Elijah added. "It's a business opportunity. The aviation industry has effectively ignored an entire segment of qualified buyers through these practices." The observation struck a chord. Victor had been studying industry projections that suggested changing demographics among high-net-worth individuals, a trend Skyline had largely ignored in its marketing and sales strategies. "The world is changing," Judge Harmon noted. "By 2030, minority-owned businesses are projected to control over $1.5 trillion in spending power. Companies that establish themselves as equitable partners now will have significant advantages in capturing that market. Patricia frowned, unconvinced. Our existing customer base might react negatively to such dramatic changes. They've come to expect a certain environment. Certain environment meaning what exactly? Elijah asked mildly. Patricia hesitated, the implication clear. I simply mean our established clientele has expectations about their purchasing experience. Are you suggesting they expect an environment free from people who look like me? Elijah pressed. That's not what It's precisely what you're suggesting, Judge Harmon interrupted. And therein lies the problem. When businesses cater to prejudice, they become complicit in it. The challenge forced everyone to confront the uncomfortable reality. Skyline's exclusivity had never been solely about wealth. It had also been about race appearance and cultural markers that functioned as proxies for discrimination. Victor, who had been quietly analyzing the proposal, finally spoke. The commission restructuring makes sense regardless. Our current system incentivizes exactly the behavior Mr. Morgan displayed, quick judgments based on appearance rather than qualification. Agreed. Patricia nodded. And the training component aligns with initiatives corporate has been considering already. A subtle shift was occurring in the room from resistance to recognition that these changes might benefit Skyline beyond merely avoiding liability. What about the independent investigation? Michael asked. That could uncover additional incidents. That's rather the point, Judge Harmon noted dryly. Victor leaned forward. If we commit to these changes, Mr. Harris, what assurances do we have that this incident won't become public regardless? Elijah's expression remained thoughtful. I have no interest in public humiliation for Skyline or for Mr. Morgan. My goal is systemic change, not revenge or publicity. He reached for his pocket watch, opening it to reveal a faded photograph inside his grandfather, standing beside the original 50 acres determination, evident despite the challenges of his era. My grandfather faced discrimination with no recourse. Elijah explained, his voice softening slightly. My father faced it with limited options. I have the resources to address it differently, not just for myself, but for those who will come after me. The personal glimpse shifted the atmosphere further. This wasn't merely a business transaction or legal negotiation. It was a chance to correct a persistent injustice. An uncomfortable silence fell as the executives considered their options. For Patricia, the calculation was primarily financial, the potential costs of litigation versus the expense of implementing reforms. For Michael, it was about salvaging his career after his failure to address the pattern earlier. For Victor, it was more complex, a chance to align his professional actions with his personal values. Not everyone agrees with your approach, Mr. Harris, Patricia noted. Many would argue for more aggressive legal action, public exposure, boycotts. Why this collaborative path? It was a fair question. Within the Black business community, perspectives on addressing discrimination varied widely. Some advocated for separate institutions and boycotts of discriminatory businesses. Others pushed for legal remedies and punitive damages. Elijah's approach, systemic reform through economic leverage, represented just one philosophy among many. Because sustainable change requires both pressure and partnership, Elijah replied. Lawsuits create financial consequences, but often minimal cultural change. Public shaming generates temporary attention, but rarely lasting reform. I'm interested in transformation that outlasts headlines. Judge Harmon nodded approval. Mr. Harris's approach combines accountability with opportunity, a balance rarely achieved in these situations. I believe we can work with this framework, Patricia decided after a quiet consultation with Victor. With some adjustments to implementation timelines and reporting structures, I'm open to reasonable modifications, Elijah agreed, as long as the core principles remain intact. As they began working through specific details, a knock at the door interrupted them. Gabriella entered, tablet in hand. Excuse me, she said, but there's something you should know. She placed her tablet on the table, displaying a social media feed, where a brief clip of Brandon's confrontation with Elijah had already been viewed over 5,000 times. One of your customers recorded the initial interaction, Gabriella explained. It's spreading quickly. The executives exchanged alarmed glances. This changes the public relations calculus considerably, Patricia observed grimly. Perhaps Elijah acknowledged, but it doesn't change what's right. The same reforms are needed whether the incident is public or private. Victor studied him with newfound respect. You're not leveraging this exposure to demand more concessions. This isn't about leverage, Elijah replied simply. It's about dignity mine and everyone who comes through your doors after me. The statement hung in the air, its moral clarity cutting through corporate calculations of liability and damage control. I think we have the foundation for an agreement, Patricia concluded. Our legal team will draft formal documents incorporating these conditions alongside the aircraft purchase agreement. As the executives turned to practical implementation questions, Gabriella caught Elijah's eye. A silent acknowledgement passing between them. Recognition that change often required both outside pressure and inside advocacy. By late afternoon, the agreement was finalized. Skyline Aviation committed to all 5 reform conditions with specific timelines, accountability measures, and transparent reporting requirements. The document wasn't just a settlement. It was a roadmap for fundamental change within the company and potentially across the industry. Elijah signed both the reform agreement and the purchase contract for the Citation XLS, plus the 2 transactions inextricably linked in purpose and principle. Congratulations on your aircraft purchase, Mr. Harris, Patricia said, formally extending her hand. Congratulations on choosing a better path forward, Elijah replied, his handshake firm and unhurried. The grip of a man who had transformed discrimination into opportunity, not just for himself, but for those who would follow. The following Monday morning, all Skyline Aviation employees nationwide received an unusual email from CEO Richard Harrington. The message was direct and unflinching. Last week, an incident at our Atlanta showroom revealed serious flaws in our company culture and practices. A qualified customer was subjected to discriminatory treatment based on appearance and race. This behavior contradicted our stated values, but more troublingly aligned with unwritten practices that have been allowed to persist throughout our organization. Effective immediately, we are implementing comprehensive changes to address these issues. The email detailed the 5 conditions from Elijah's agreement now formalized as corporate policy. Most employees were shocked by both the candor of the message and the sweeping nature of the changes announced. In Atlanta, the atmosphere at the showroom was tense as an independent auditing team arrived to begin their investigation. Michael Peterson gathered the staff for a difficult conversation. I'll be direct, he began. What happened with Mr. Harris wasn't an isolated incident. It reflected patterns in how we've conducted business, patterns I overlooked or tacitly approved. That ends today. For Michael, this admission represented a profound personal reckoning. Throughout his career, he had prided himself on professionalism while ignoring the discriminatory foundations of that professionalism. The audit had forced him to confront his complicity, the complaints he'd dismissed, the patterns he'd ignored, the bias he'd rationalized as business strategy. I failed as a manager, he continued, voice strained with emotion. Not just in this incident, but in fostering a culture where such behavior was acceptable. That responsibility falls directly on me. He outlined immediate changes, a revision of the customer qualification process to rely on objective criteria rather than subjective assessments, a temporary freeze on commission structures while they were redesigned to eliminate incentives for discriminatory behavior, and mandatory training sessions scheduled for the following week. Some of you may find these changes uncomfortable or unnecessary, Michael acknowledged. That discomfort is part of the process. We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. Not everyone received the announcement positively. In the break room, several veteran salespeople grumbled about oversensitivity and political correctness. One guy complains, "And suddenly we're overhauling everything," muttered Stephen Anderson, a top producer from the charter sales division. "This is ridiculous. We're going to lose all our best customers." "You mean your white customers?" corrected Alicia, who had joined the conversation. "Because that's what this is really about." Stephen stared at her in shock. Alicia had never spoken up like this before. Don't pretend we haven't all been doing exactly what Brandon did, she continued. Judging customers the second they walk in, based on appearance, race, accent. I've been the first line of that discrimination for years, deciding who gets immediate attention and who gets the runaround. I'm done with it. Her unexpected stance silenced the grumbling temporarily, though resistance remained among staff who had benefited from the old system. Gabriella, overhearing from the doorway, stepped into the room. The company has two choices, she said. Change voluntarily now or change under court order later. Either way, change is coming. What data? Stephen challenged. Gabriella pulled up the statistical analysis on her tablet. This data. Our system tracks everything. Wait times, interaction, duration, pricing, offered financing terms. The pattern is unmistakable and indefensible. The concrete evidence silenced some critics, though not all. Change would clearly face resistance from those who had benefited from the old system. Meanwhile, at Skyline's corporate headquarters, Patricia Lawson faced open rebellion from other regional directors during an emergency conference call. This sets a dangerous precedent, argued Thomas Reynolds from the West Coast Division. One customer dictating corporate policy. This isn't about one customer, Patricia countered. The audit has already uncovered similar patterns at 7 other locations. We're facing potential class action exposure if we don't address this systemically. And what about our established clientele? Demanded Elizabeth Carrington from the Northeast. They expect a certain atmosphere, a certain level of exclusivity. Let's be clear about what exclusivity has meant in practice, Patricia replied sharply. If you're suggesting we should maintain discriminatory practices to please certain customers, that position is both legally and ethically indefensible. The pushback was fiercer than anticipated, revealing how deeply entrenched the problematic practices had become. Several directors threatened resignation if the reforms were implemented. Others suggested the changes would destroy Skyline's brand identity, and the financial impact pressed another director. Initial projections suggest a short-term revenue dip of 3 to 5% during transition, Patricia acknowledged. But long-term modeling indicates we could actually increase market share by 7 to 12% by tapping previously alienated customer segments. The business case helped sway some holdouts, though resistance remained. Change rarely came easily, especially when it challenged long-standing practices and implicit biases. At the Atlanta showroom, the independent auditors worked methodically, reviewing records and interviewing staff. Their preliminary findings confirmed what Elijah and Cassandra had identified: systematic differences in how customers were treated based on appearance, race, and other visual cues. More troubling were the discovered pricing disparities. The audit revealed that customers from minority groups were quoted initial prices averaging 8.3% above standard rates, while white customers typically received initial quotes at or below standard rates. This isn't just discriminatory, the lead auditor explained to Victor Harrington. It potentially violates federal pricing transparency regulations. Victor nodded grimly. How widespread is it? Based on preliminary data, it appears to be standard practice, rather than isolated behavior, the auditor replied. We've found similar patterns at 12 of 15 locations examined so far. The scope of the problem was greater than anyone had initially realized. Not just a rogue salesperson or problematic showroom, but a pervasive culture that had normalized discrimination under the guise of customer assessment and qualification. The reforms triggered significant staff turnover. Within 3 months, nearly 20% of Skyline's sales force had resigned or been terminated. The financial impact was immediate revenue dropped by 7% in the first quarter of implementation, worse than the projected 3 to 5%. Board members began questioning the wisdom of the changes. Shareholder concerns mounted as quarterly numbers missed targets. For a moment, it seemed the entire reform effort might collapse under financial pressure. Then something unexpected happened. New customers began appearing in showrooms nationwide, qualified buyers who had previously avoided Skyline due to its reputation. Word spread through business networks about the company's transformation. Within 6 months, sales had rebounded to previous levels with a notably more diverse customer base. By the second quarter of implementation, revenue had stabilized. By the third quarter, growth had resumed. The business case for inclusion was proving itself in real time, silencing many critics who had predicted disaster. In a separate disciplinary hearing, Brandon Morgan sat across from Patricia Lawson and Skyline's legal counsel. The evidence against him was overwhelming testimonies from 8 former customers, documentation from Gabriella, video footage from showroom security cameras, and his own admissions during the incident with Elijah. Your actions have exposed Skyline Aviation to significant liability. The legal counsel explained, his tone clinical rather than accusatory. More importantly, they've caused real harm to numerous customers. Brandon nodded, his usual confidence entirely absent. I understand. Patricia studied him carefully. What I find most concerning isn't just the pattern of discrimination, but the calculation behind it. You deliberately inflated prices for certain customers while offering discounts to others. She slid a folder across the table containing a data analysis of Brandon's sales records. The pattern was unmistakable. White customers consistently received better terms than customers of color, even those with identical financial qualifications. This goes beyond bias into potentially fraudulent territory, the lawyer noted. Brandon stared at the data, seeing his career through a new lens. The strategy he'd employed for years, cultivating wealthy white clients while dismissing others, was laid bare in clinical charts and statistics. His reputation for sales excellence now appeared built on discrimination rather than skill. What happens now? He asked quietly. Your employment with Skyline Aviation is terminated effective immediately, Patricia stated. Your final commissions will be withheld, pending review of potentially fraudulent transactions. And you should be aware that several former customers are considering legal action against both you personally and the company. Brandon's face drained of color. Legal action. But I was following. You were following your own biases, Patricia interrupted. Don't attempt to claim this was corporate policy. While we acknowledge systemic failures in oversight, the specific discriminatory behaviors were your choices. As security escorted Brandon from the building, he passed Alicia at the reception desk. Their eyes met briefly, her expression a mixture of fear and recognition. She had participated in the same system, followed the same unwritten rules. Would she be next? The question reflected the broader uncertainty rippling through Skyline Aviation as accountability replaced complacency and long-ignored patterns faced scrutiny for the first time. 3 days after the confrontation that changed an industry, Elijah Harris returned to Skyline Aviation to complete his aircraft purchase. The atmosphere in the showroom had transformed dramatically. Michael Peterson personally greeted him at the entrance, accompanied by Gabriella, who had been assigned as his primary sales contact following Brandon's termination. Mr. Harris, thank you for giving us the opportunity to earn your business, Michael said, the formality in his tone reflecting a new professional distance rather than the desperate damage control of their previous interaction. Thank you for following through on our agreement, Elijah replied, noting the visible changes already implemented in the showroom. New signage displayed Skyline's updated customer service pledge, explicitly mentioning respect and equity. The qualification process had been standardized with clear documentation available to all potential customers. Most notably, the sales team now reflected greater diversity, with several new faces present. In the conference room, Elijah reviewed the purchase agreement for the Citation XLS Plus with meticulous attention to detail. Cassandra accompanied him, verifying that the terms matched industry standards, neither inflated as Brandon had initially attempted, nor discounted as later offered during the negotiations. The price is fair market value, Cassandra confirmed after reviewing the documentation. No special treatment either way. Elijah nodded with satisfaction. That's exactly what I wanted. The technical details of the transaction were substantial. Beyond the $12.4 million base price, the aircraft required specific customizations for Harris. Agricultural's needs, enhanced avionics for operation from rural airstrips, specialized communications equipment for maintaining contact with ground operations during flights, modified cargo capacity for transporting sensitive agricultural samples, and interior configurations optimized for working during transit. Gabriella guided them through these options with detailed technical specifications rather than luxury marketing language. Her approach focused on functionality and efficiency, recognizing that Elijah viewed the aircraft as a business tool rather than a status symbol. For the cabin configuration, would you prefer the standard 8-passenger layout or the modified 6-passenger with expanded workspace, she asked, displaying detailed floor plans for each option. The workspace configuration would better serve my needs, Elijah decided. I often review agricultural data and contracts during flights. The discussion moved to specific performance metrics for the Citation XLS Plus at the regional airports serving Harris Agricultural's operations. The Flint River Regional Airport near your South Georgia facilities has a 500-foot runway. Gabriella noted, checking specifications. The XLS Plus requires only 560 feet for takeoff at maximum weight, providing a comfortable safety margin. For your Charleston operations, Charleston Executive Airport offers a 500-foot runway, also well within parameters. And as they discussed avionics options, Michael received a notification on his tablet. He excused himself briefly, returning with a slightly concerned expression. Mr. Harris, I've just been informed that a news crew from Business Aviation today has arrived outside. They're requesting comment on the discrimination incident and your aircraft purchase. Elijah's expression remained unchanged. Please inform them that this is a private business transaction, not a media event. Of course, Michael nodded, relieved by the response. Though you should be aware that the story has generated significant attention in aviation circles. Several industry publications have requested interviews. I'm not interested in publicity, Elijah stated simply. My goal was systemic change, not personal exposure. Cassandra smiled slightly. The reforms are the story worth telling, not the incident that prompted them. As they finalized the specifications, Victor Harrington joined them briefly. Mr. Harris, I wanted to personally inform you that the independent investigation began yesterday. The preliminary findings already suggest systemic issues extending beyond our Atlanta location. That's unfortunate, but not surprising, Elijah replied. The important thing is that you're addressing it transparently. Victor nodded. We're committed to the process, however uncomfortable it might be. Your intervention has prompted changes that were long overdue. The implementation wasn't proceeding without challenges. Victor shared that several high-profile clients had already threatened to take their business elsewhere if standards were lowered. Thinly veiled references to maintaining the exclusive atmosphere that had previously defined Skyline. We anticipated some pushback, Victor acknowledged. But I've made it clear that this isn't open for negotiation. Either our clients accept that we serve all qualified buyers with equal respect, or they're free to go elsewhere. This stance represented significant risk for Skyline, potentially alienating established customers before new ones could replace them. Yet the conviction in Victor's tone suggested he had made peace with that risk. When the final documents were prepared, Elijah signed without fanfare, authorizing the transfer of $12.4 million for the aircraft and its customizations. The transaction was substantial by any measure, yet it had almost been lost due to prejudice and assumption. Michael presented Elijah with a model of his soon-to-be-delivered Citation XLS, plus customized with the Harris Agricultural Enterprises logo that would eventually adorn the actual aircraft. Delivery is scheduled for 4 months from today, he confirmed. We'll provide weekly updates on the build progress. As they concluded the transaction, Elijah placed a business card on the table. The corporate logo revealed another connection that had never been mentioned during the negotiations. Harris Agricultural Enterprises was a major supplier to 3 national grocery chains that were also significant clients of Skyline Aviation, purchasing aircraft for executive transport. Michael's eyes widened slightly as he made the connection. Elijah could have leveraged this relationship during their negotiations, but had chosen not to. Thank you for your business, Mr. Harris, Michael said, a new understanding reflected in his tone. This purchase was never just about an aircraft, Elijah replied quietly. It was about establishing that I and others who look like me have the right to be treated with dignity, regardless of how we dress or what assumptions you make about our profession. He gestured toward the showroom beyond the conference room glass, where business continued with subtle but meaningful differences from the previous week. The real test isn't how you treat me now that you know who I am. It's how you treat the next person who walks through that door when you don't know who they are. With that fundamental truth hanging in the air, Elijah departed with Cassandra, leaving behind not just a significant sale, but the catalyst for genuine transformation. News of the incident at Skyline Aviation spread through the private aviation industry with remarkable speed. Within 2 weeks, the story had reached competing dealers, suppliers, manufacturers, and industry associations through a combination of formal channels and informal networks. The luxury aviation sector had long operated with unwritten assumptions about its clientele, maintaining an exclusive atmosphere that often functioned as a proxy for racial and cultural discrimination. While diversity initiatives existed on paper, actual industry demographics told a different story. Less than 3% of aircraft owners were Black, and less than 7% came from minority backgrounds of any kind. The stark disparity couldn't be explained by wealth distribution alone. At Westfield Aviation, Skyline's main competitor, CEO Jonathan Pierce called an emergency meeting of his executive team after 3 separate clients mentioned the incident during aircraft negotiations. "I want a comprehensive audit of our sales practices immediately," he instructed. "Customer interactions, pricing consistency, qualification procedures, everything. If we have similar issues, I want to know before we face a similar situation." The proactive approach was repeated across the industry as companies conducted internal reviews, updated training protocols, and examined their corporate cultures with new scrutiny. The ripple effect wasn't limited to immediate competitors. It extended to adjacent luxury markets from yacht sales to high-end real estate, where similar customer assessment practices had long been normalized. Trade publications seized on the story with Aviation Today, featuring a detailed analysis titled, "The High Cost of Bias: How Discrimination Impacts Luxury Markets." The article, written without Elijah's direct participation, but with information from industry sources, detailed how unconscious bias costs companies millions in lost sales and damaged reputations. Conservative estimates suggest that discriminatory practices in luxury aviation sales result in approximately $300 million in lost transactions annually, the article noted. Customers who experience or witness such treatment typically don't complain. They simply take their business elsewhere. The article cited studies showing that minority business owners often made purchasing decisions based on past experiences with discrimination. Companies perceived as unwelcoming or prejudiced were systematically excluded from consideration, creating an invisible but substantial financial impact. Social media amplified the conversation further when an edited security camera clip from the Skyline showroom leaked online. Though only capturing a brief portion of Brandon's interaction with Elijah, the footage was damning enough to generate millions of views and thousands of comments sharing similar experiences across various luxury markets. The National Business Aviation Association responded by adding a diversity component to their certification program for sales professionals. Their annual conference scheduled a special session titled "Building an Inclusive Aviation Sales Culture," featuring experts in bias recognition and mitigation. Within Skyline Aviation, the ripple effects manifested in concrete operational changes. The independent audit revealed troubling patterns across multiple locations, prompting a company-wide restructuring of sales procedures, compensation models, and management oversight. Michael Peterson, though not terminated, was reassigned to a smaller regional office, a clear demotion reflecting his failure to address the issues earlier. His personal journey had shifted from defensive self-justification to genuine reflection. In his new role, he became an unexpected advocate for reform, sharing his own evolution as a cautionary tale for other managers. "I spent 20 years convincing myself that business efficiency justified practices that were fundamentally discriminatory," he acknowledged during a company-wide training session. "Don't make my mistake. The cost to our company and to my career has been substantial." Patricia Lawson personally supervised the Atlanta showroom during the transition, implementing the promised reforms with surprising rigor. Initially skeptical of the changes, she had become an unexpected champion after seeing the data from multiple locations. "This isn't just about doing what's right," she told her team during a staff meeting. "It's about addressing a significant business blind spot. We've been systematically alienating qualified buyers based on appearance, accent, and cultural markers, effectively ignoring an entire market segment." Not everyone embraced the changes. Several veteran salespeople resigned rather than adapt to the new requirements. Their departures created opportunities for advancement, which Patricia deliberately filled with qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds, including Gabriela Rodriguez, whose promotion to sales manager recognized both her professional capabilities and her ethical courage. Alicia Dominguez, the receptionist who had initially participated in Brandon's discrimination, underwent her own transformation. After documenting her role in the pattern, she requested transfer to the training department, where she now helped develop programs to identify and address discriminatory practices in customer service. "I was the first line of discrimination for years," she explained in a training video, now required viewing for all new hires. "I decided who received immediate attention and who was made to wait. I never questioned the criteria I was using, but I should have." The diversity training sessions initially met with skepticism by some staff members, gradually shifted perspectives as real-world examples from the audit made the business impact of bias undeniable. Sales that had been lost, customers who had been alienated, opportunities that had been missed, all quantified in stark financial terms that transcended moral arguments. "We've identified at least $42 million in transactions over the past 3 years, where qualified buyers went to competitors after negative experiences here," the trainer noted, displaying concrete data rather than abstract concepts. "This isn't just about doing what's right, it's about doing what's profitable." For Brandon Morgan, the consequences extended beyond job loss. 3 aviation companies rejected his applications after simple internet searches revealed his history. His attempt to position himself as the victim in a retaliatory blog post backfired spectacularly when former colleagues publicly challenged his account with additional evidence of past misconduct. Unable to secure similar employment, Brandon filed for bankruptcy protection. After 6 months of unemployment depleted his savings. The lavish lifestyle he had once flaunted, funded by commissions earned through preferential treatment, collapsed like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Elijah Harris continued building his agricultural empire, his new citation XLS, plus enabling more efficient oversight of his expanding operations. He declined numerous interview requests about the Skyline incident, preferring to let the systemic changes speak for themselves, rather than becoming the public face of yet another discrimination story. The most significant ripple effect came from an unexpected quarter. At an industry conference in Dallas, Elijah was approached by Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Westfield Aviation, Skyline's largest competitor. "Mr. Harris," Pierce began, "I've been following the changes at Skyline with great interest. They're implementing reforms that frankly our entire industry needs." Elijah nodded, but offered no comment. "I'd like to be proactive rather than reactive," Pierce continued. "Would you be willing to consult with Westfield on developing truly inclusive sales practices? Not as a token advisor, but as someone who could help us fundamentally rethink our approach." The proposition was unexpected but intriguing. Unlike Skyline's request for him to serve on their advisory board, which would have been largely symbolic, this offered an opportunity for preventative rather than reactive change. "I'm not a diversity consultant," Elijah replied, "but I know several excellent ones who could partner with your team effectively." "That's a start," Pierce agreed. "But I'd value your perspective as both a customer and a successful business leader who understands what real inclusion requires." This conversation would eventually lead to the industry's most comprehensive inclusion initiative, one that would transform sales practices far beyond aircraft dealerships. The ripples from that single confrontation in Atlanta would continue expanding, touching businesses and individuals in ways Elijah hadn't anticipated, but had hoped might be possible. As he often told his farm managers, "We plant seeds not knowing exactly how they'll grow, but trusting in the process if the preparation is right." 6 months after his termination from Skyline Aviation, Brandon Morgan sat alone in a sparsely furnished apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta. Gone was the luxury high-rise downtown. Gone was the German sports car. Gone was the custom wardrobe. The bankruptcy proceedings had stripped away the external trappings of success, leaving Brandon to confront the foundation upon which he'd built his career and identity. His laptop displayed yet another rejection email from a potential employer, the 23rd since his termination. "Thank you for your interest." The email concluded with corporate politeness, "But we've decided to pursue candidates whose experience better aligns with our company values." Brandon closed the laptop with a sigh. The phrase company values had become a transparent code for, "We know who you are and what you did." The world had moved on from the incident, but the internet never forgot. His name had become permanently linked with discrimination in every search result. Articles, forum, discussions, industry analyses. Even after he'd removed all references to Skyline Aviation from his resume, potential employers inevitably discovered the incident during background checks. His phone rang, one of the few luxuries he'd managed to maintain. The caller ID displayed Dr. Raymond, diversity consultant. Brandon had been attending mandated sessions with Dr. Raymond as part of the settlement agreement with former customers who had filed discrimination complaints. Initially, Brandon had approached these sessions with resentment, viewing them as an undeserved punishment. But over time, something unexpected had occurred. Through structured discussions and uncomfortable self-examination, Brandon had begun to recognize patterns in his thinking that extended far beyond sales techniques. "Mr. Morgan." Dr. Raymond had challenged him during their third session. "Do you believe you treated customers differently based on race?" "I treated them differently based on who I thought could afford our products," Brandon had defended. "And how did you determine who could afford them?" The question had forced Brandon to confront the uncomfortable truth. His assessments had been rooted in stereotypes and biases rather than objective criteria. Now, months into the process, Brandon answered the phone with a different perspective. "Hello, Dr. Raymond." "Brandon, I'm calling about the opportunity we discussed last week," the consultant said. "The retail training program is looking for someone who can speak authentically about the business costs of discrimination. Your first-hand experience could be valuable if you're ready to own it publicly." The proposition was both terrifying and compelling. Using his failure as a teaching tool for others would require a level of humility Brandon had never before possessed. "I'd have to tell the whole truth," Brandon said slowly, "about what I did, why I did it, what it cost everyone involved." "That's precisely why it would be powerful," Dr. Raymond confirmed. "This isn't about redemption or forgiveness. It's about preventing others from making the same mistakes." After ending the call, Brandon walked to his window, looking out at the modest neighborhood that was now his home. The financial consequences of his actions had been severe, but the internal reckoning had been even more profound. Yet even now, Brandon caught himself making assumptions about the people he observed in his new neighborhood. Quick judgments about their worth, their education, their potential, based on superficial observations. The habits of prejudice ran deep, resisting even conscious efforts to uproot them. "It's like trying to unlearn your native language," he murmured to himself, recognizing how automatic these thought patterns remained despite months of effort. Walking to the corner store that evening, Brandon noticed a group of young black men gathered on the sidewalk. His first instinct, formed through decades of media stereotypes and unchallenged assumptions, was to cross the street. Then he caught himself recognizing the prejudice in the impulse. As he approached, he realized they were setting up a voter registration table preparing for an upcoming local election. The automatic association between young black men and potential danger was so ingrained he hadn't even questioned it until now. Later that week, Brandon met with Gabriela Rodriguez at a small coffee shop halfway between their homes. The meeting had been his idea, part of the personal amends he had begun making to those affected by his behavior. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began awkwardly. Gabriella nodded but remained guarded. "What did you want to discuss?" "I owe you an apology," Brandon said simply. "Not just for how I treated customers, but for how I treated you, dismissing your concerns, creating a hostile environment, expecting you to participate in discrimination." Gabriella studied him carefully, looking for signs of the old Brandon, the manipulative salesman, capable of feigning whatever emotion seemed advantageous. "You reported those incidents at significant personal risk," Brandon continued. "You did the right thing when I was doing the wrong thing. I should have learned from you instead of expecting you to follow my lead." "Is this part of your settlement requirements?" Gabriella asked directly. "No," Brandon admitted. "This is something I needed to do, for whatever it's worth." Gabriella's expression softened slightly. "What are you doing now?" Brandon explained the training program opportunity, his voice lacking the polish and confidence that had once defined him. "It's not much," he acknowledged, "but it's something constructive from a destructive experience. It's easier to talk about change than to make it," Gabriella observed, stirring her coffee. "I've watched dozens of salespeople at Skyline sit through the new training nodding and agreeing, then return to their desks and make the same old assumptions." Brandon winced at the accuracy of the observation. "I'm finding that out myself. I catch myself making those snap judgments constantly, even now." "At least you're catching them," Gabriella noted. "Most people don't even notice." She hesitated, then added, "You know, there were times I almost became you." Brandon looked up surprised. "Growing up Hispanic in Miami, I learned early that assimilation meant distancing myself from other minorities," she explained. "In college, I consciously changed my accent, straightened my hair, did everything to fit in with the white business students. When I joined Skyline, I could have easily become another gatekeeper, another filter." "What stopped you?" Brandon asked. "My father," Gabriella replied. "He built his trucking business despite being rejected for loans 3 times by banks that approved white applicants with worse credit. He never forgot what that felt like. He made sure I didn't either." As they parted, she offered neither forgiveness nor condemnation, only a simple acknowledgement. "People can change, Brandon. Systems can change. Both require honesty about what went wrong first and constant vigilance after." The words stayed with Brandon as he walked home, contemplating how thoroughly his perspective had been transformed. 6 months earlier, he had seen himself as the victim of an overreaction to an honest mistake. Now he recognized himself as having been both perpetrator and product of a biased system, and perhaps, if he continued this difficult work, part of its eventual solution. But the path forward wouldn't be simple or straight. That night, he caught himself assuming a group of young black men on his street corner must be dealing drugs, then forced himself to recognize the bias in that assumption. They were actually signing up voters for an upcoming local election. Unlearning is harder than learning, he thought, recognizing that his journey had only begun. 1 year after the confrontation at Skyline Aviation, Elijah Harris stood in a recently harvested field on his South Carolina property. The rich soil beneath his boots represented 3 generations of family legacy, the foundation upon which he had built a business empire. This particular field in the South Carolina Lowcountry had been part of a former plantation land his grandfather had never been allowed to own. When Elijah purchased it 15 years ago, some locals had whispered their disapproval. Now it produced some of the most sought-after organic crops in the region, employing dozens of local workers at wages well above industry standards. His grandfather's pocket watch ticked steadily in his hand as he checked the time, a habit formed through decades of agricultural precision. In farming, timing was everything. The difference between success and failure often came down to recognizing the exact moment to plant, to harvest, to innovate. The contrast between this setting and the pristine aircraft showroom couldn't have been more pronounced. Yet Elijah moved through both worlds with the same quiet confidence. The difference was that now, increasingly, both worlds acknowledged his right to belong. His new citation, XLS, plus gleamed in the morning sunlight at the private airstrip bordering his property. The aircraft had proven to be exactly the business asset he'd anticipated, allowing him to oversee operations across 3 states with unprecedented efficiency and expand international distribution of Harris agricultural products. The jet's distinctive appearance, elegant white fuselage with the Harris agricultural logo prominently displayed, had become something of a symbol in the industry. When it touched down at regional airports throughout the Southeast, word spread quickly: Elijah Harris was visiting. What had once been merely transportation had transformed into a statement about who belonged in the skies. Today, however, the jet served a different purpose. Elijah was hosting the inaugural session of the Harris Agricultural Mentorship Program, an initiative pairing promising young minority students interested in agricultural careers with established industry leaders. 20 students from historically black colleges and universities across the Southeast had arrived that morning, many experiencing their first flight aboard Elijah's private aircraft. Now they gathered in the field, listening attentively as he explained sustainable farming practices developed over decades. Agriculture isn't just about what we grow in the soil, Elijah told them, kneeling to gather a handful of earth. It's about what we cultivate in the systems around us. For generations, black farmers were systematically denied access to land loans and markets. Today, we're reclaiming our place in an industry our ancestors built. The statistics were sobering. In 1920, black farmers had operated nearly 1 million farms across America. By 2020, 3 fewer than 50,000 remained a systematic dismantling through discriminatory lending practices, legal manipulation, and outright land theft. The largest transfer of wealth in American agricultural history had occurred largely without notice or consequence. Among the students, Marcus Washington showed particular promise. The 20-year-old agribusiness major had developed an innovative irrigation system for small-scale urban farming, already attracting attention from sustainable agriculture programs. Mr. Harris, Marcus asked as they walked between rows of organic vegetables, how do you navigate spaces where people don't expect you to belong? Elijah considered this question carefully. With preparation, purpose, and perspective, he finally answered. Preparation means knowing more than is expected of you. Purpose means understanding why you're entering that space in the first place. And perspective means recognizing that their limitations aren't yours. He paused beside a section of the field where his proprietary drip irrigation system was visible. Thin tubes running beneath the soil surface, delivering precise amounts of water and nutrients directly to plant roots. This system reduces water usage by 40%, while increasing yields by 22%. Elijah explained. We developed it when traditional suppliers wouldn't extend credit for conventional irrigation equipment. Their limitation became our innovation. Without specifically mentioning the Skyline Aviation incident, Elijah shared the broader principle it had reinforced. When someone misjudges you based on appearance, they're telling their story, not yours. Your responsibility isn't to correct their narrative, it's to continue writing your own. Later that afternoon, as the mentorship group toured Harris Agricultural's processing facility, Elijah received an unexpected call from Patricia Lawson at Skyline Aviation. Mr. Harris, I wanted to update you personally on the outcomes of our reform initiatives, she began. The independent audit is complete, and we've implemented all recommended changes across all locations. The report detailed significant findings. Discriminatory practices had been identified at 11 of Skyline's 15 showrooms nationwide. 28 employees had received disciplinary action ranging from retraining to termination, and sales to customers from underrepresented groups had increased 34% since the new practices were implemented. Most importantly, Patricia continued, we've established permanent structures to prevent backsliding. The Customer Advisory Board includes diversity experts who review our metrics quarterly, and our compensation model now rewards inclusive customer service rather than just sales volume. That's substantial progress, Elijah acknowledged. Though I suspect there's still resistance internally, Patricia chuckled dryly. You could say that. We've lost some veteran salespeople who couldn't adapt. But surprisingly, Revenue is up 12% despite the turnover. Turns out alienating potential customers isn't a great business model. The transformation hadn't come without significant challenges. Several high-profile clients had indeed taken their business elsewhere, publicly complaining about declining standards, thinly veiled references to the more inclusive atmosphere. Industry traditionalists had predicted Skyline's demise. Instead, the company had discovered an untapped market segment: successful professionals from diverse backgrounds who had previously avoided Skyline due to its exclusionary reputation. The financial results were beginning to speak for themselves. After ending the call, Elijah rejoined the mentorship group, where Marcus was explaining his irrigation concept to the other students. The young man's enthusiasm reminded Elijah of himself at that age, full of ideas and determination, navigating a world not designed for his success. The difference was that Marcus and his peers would have something Elijah hadn't: visible examples of Black excellence in agricultural leadership and concrete pathways to follow. The mentorship program wasn't charity. It was strategic investment in the future of an industry that had historically excluded people who looked like them. That evening, as the students departed on Elijah's citation, he reflected on the multiple dimensions of impact from the Skyline confrontation. The immediate result had been accountability for discriminatory behavior. The intermediate effect had been policy and practice changes across an industry. But the long-term legacy would be in how those changes created space for others to enter previously unwelcoming environments. When the Harris Agricultural Mentorship Program hosted its first alumni gathering, 3 years later, 6 graduates would arrive in private aircraft. They piloted themselves, a direct result of Elijah's partnership with flight schools to create opportunities for young Black aviators. What had begun as a confrontation over discrimination had evolved into a pipeline for the next generation. As the jet disappeared into the horizon, Elijah turned back toward his fields, where work continued as it had for generations. His grandfather, who had started with just 50 acres in an era when Black land ownership was actively discouraged, would have understood the significance of both the aircraft and the mentorship program. Both represented the same fundamental principle: claiming space in worlds built to exclude you. This, Elijah reflected, was the truest form of success, not just personal achievement, but creating pathways for others to follow. The soil beneath his boots had taught him patience, the understanding that transformation required both immediate action and long-term vision. Some seeds sprouted quickly. Others took seasons to bear fruit. The changes he'd set in motion at Skyline Aviation had begun with confrontation, but would be sustained through something more powerful: the simple, irrefutable evidence that inclusion strengthened rather than weakened the systems that adopted it. Elijah checked his grandfather's watch one last time before heading back to the farmhouse. The timepiece that had counted the hours of discrimination now marked the moments of progress. Instead, each tick a reminder that change, like farming, required both decisive action and patient cultivation. 2 years to the day after the confrontation that changed an industry, Elijah Harris returned to Skyline Aviation. Unlike his previous visits, this one was unannounced and unplanned, a spontaneous decision while passing through Atlanta. Wearing the same work clothes he'd worn that first day, dusty boots, jeans, and a simple button-up shirt, Elijah entered the showroom alone. He carried nothing to suggest his wealth or status. No portfolio of financial documents, no advisor at his side. Just a man in work clothes, indistinguishable from the farmer who had first walked through those doors and been judged unworthy of respect. The morning had found him inspecting a new drought-resistant crop varietal at his South Georgia operation near the Flint River Basin. The soil there was different from his South Carolina fields, sandier, requiring different irrigation approaches and careful nutrient management. He'd spent hours walking the rows, checking moisture levels, and consulting with his agricultural scientists. There had been no time to change before his flight to Atlanta for a meeting with distributors. The earth from those fields still clung to his boots as he entered Skyline Aviation, a physical connection to the land that had built his fortune. and the legacy he continued to expand. The receptionist, a young woman who hadn't been employed during the original incident, looked up with a warm, professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Skyline Aviation. How may I assist you today?" The greeting was genuine, without reservation or assessment. No glances at his dusty boots. No subtle signals to salespeople about a potential time waster. "I'm interested in your aircraft options," Elijah stated simply, offering no qualification or explanation. "Certainly," she replied. "Would you prefer to speak with a sales consultant about specific models? Or would you like a general overview of our inventory first?" The question was neutral, designed to determine his needs rather than his worthiness. It was a small interaction, seemingly routine, but represented exactly the transformation Elijah had sought to create. A general overview would be helpful, he decided. "Perfect. Let me introduce you to Aaron, one of our sales consultants." The young man who approached was in his mid-20s, African-American, with a confident professional demeanor. He extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Welcome to Skyline Aviation, sir. I'm Aaron Matthews. What brings you in today?" Aaron's presence itself represented change. Before the reforms, Skyline had employed only 2 black sales consultants across 15 locations. Now diversity in staffing had become a priority rather than an afterthought. As they walked through the showroom, Aaron provided knowledgeable information about each aircraft, asking thoughtful questions about Elijah's potential needs without making assumptions. He offered coffee technical specifications and respectful attention basic courtesies once selectively distributed. "This Phenom 300E might interest you if you're looking for something in the light jet category," Aaron explained. "It offers excellent range, 2010 nautical miles, with 6 passengers, and can operate from runways as short as 138 feet, which is ideal if you need access to smaller regional airports." The technical information was delivered neither condescendingly nor with unnecessary jargon, just clear, useful facts presented respectfully. When Elijah asked about specific performance metrics, Aaron provided detailed answers rather than vague generalities. Elijah noticed a subtle plaque near the main display that hadn't been there during his last visit. It read, "The Harris Standard Equal Respect, Equal Service, No Exceptions." The inscription caught him by surprise. He'd never authorized his name for such recognition, and Skyline had no obligation to acknowledge him in this way. This wasn't part of their agreement. It was a genuine recognition of impact. Aaron noticed his attention on the plaque. "That was installed last month," he explained. "It reminds us of our commitment every day." "You know the story behind it?" Elijah asked. Aaron nodded. "Everyone here does. It's part of our training now, required reading before anyone interacts with customers." He hesitated briefly before adding, "Actually, your experience is why I applied to work here." "How so?" Elijah inquired, genuinely curious. "I was studying aviation management and read about the changes Skyline implemented after your visit. I wanted to be part of a company that had learned from its mistakes and committed to doing better." The comment revealed something unexpected. The confrontation hadn't just changed policies. It had attracted people committed to maintaining those changes. The transformation had become self-sustaining, embedded in organizational culture, rather than merely documented in procedures. As they continued the tour, Gabriela Rodriguez emerged from a meeting, recognizing Elijah immediately, despite his unannounced visit. "Mr. Harris," she greeted him warmly. "What a wonderful surprise." "Just passing through," Elijah explained. "Thought I'd see how things were progressing." Gabriela smiled. "Aaron has been taking good care of you, I hope." "Exemplary service," Elijah confirmed. "Aaron is one of our top consultants," Gabriela noted with evident pride. "He's part of our new apprenticeship program, providing opportunities for students from underrepresented communities in aviation." The program, she explained, had been developed in partnership with local colleges, creating pathways for diverse talent to enter the industry. It was another outgrowth of the changes initiated after Elijah's confrontation, extending beyond sales practices into hiring and development. As they spoke, a young man entered the showroom, dressed similarly to Elijah in work clothes, bearing traces of agricultural labor. Aaron's colleague greeted the newcomer with the same professional courtesy Elijah had received. No hesitation, no judgment, no subtle signals of dismissal. The sight confirmed what Elijah had hoped to see. The changes weren't performative or personal to him. They had become standard practice applied equally to everyone, regardless of appearance. Your visit that day changed everything, Gabriella acknowledged quietly. Not just procedures, but perspectives. We're a better company for it. Elijah nodded, watching the young farmer receive respectful attention from across the showroom. That's what real change looks like, he observed. Not special treatment for the few, but equal respect for everyone. As he prepared to leave, Elijah declined Gabriella's offer to show him their newest aircraft models. This wasn't about business today, he explained. I just needed to see for myself. Near the exit, he paused by the Harris Standard plaque, reflecting on the journey from confrontation to transformation. What had begun as a personal stand against discrimination had evolved into something larger than himself, a ripple effect touching lives he would never meet, creating opportunities he would never see. Change doesn't come from shouting, he said to Gabriella as they reached the door. It comes from standing your ground with dignity. She smiled, recognizing his words now inscribed in Skyline's training materials. That lesson reaches far beyond our showroom. Elijah stepped outside into the Georgia sunshine, his work boots leaving no marks on the immaculate floor that had once been the site of such conflict. The absence of those marks symbolized the most important change of all. A person's worth was no longer measured by the dust on their shoes, but by the respect they received simply for walking through the door. He reached into his pocket, feeling the familiar contours of his grandfather's watch. The timepiece that had witnessed generations of struggle had now marked a moment of genuine progress. Samuel Harris had once been denied service at establishments throughout the South. Now, his grandson could enter any business and expect equal treatment, not because of who he was, but because of a system reformed to serve everyone with dignity. Success, Elijah thought as he returned to his pickup truck, isn't just about what you build for yourself. It's about what you leave behind for others. And what he had left behind was a door held open not just for him, but for everyone who deserved to walk through it. If this story touched you today, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button to help more people see it and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of dignity and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that change is possible, both in individuals and in systems. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter, stories that change hearts and open doors. Together we can build a world where everyone is judged by their character, not by the dust on their boots.